Alrighty, so today I'm going to be talking about inalienable rights. Specifically, I'm going to talk about its application, its use, and more or less how it came to be, and essentially what that means for you. My structure will be somewhat of a historical breakdown, then interpretation, application, and then I will essentially summarize my entire session. So to start off, inalienable rights is something that is written into the Constitution. Inalienable rights essentially promises that a person's autonomy is their own body, and to a sense, like the government cannot infringe on those rights. There's been hinders to the Constitution that specifically take away these inalienable rights. Perfect example is mass incarceration. So historically, the loopholes that were written into the Constitution were before slavery, but once the Bill of Rights came in and they were revised to exclude slavery, the amendment was actually written to include a portion which says, like, essentially, if you're incarcerated, you lose those inalienable rights. So that's why people do say that incarceration is a new form of slavery, because of the fact how the system benefits off of the labor force. And so how does inalienable rights like function? What's its application? So inalienable rights, that's what essentially is a federal government policy. It's written into the Constitution, and so therefore any state in the United States must follow this Bill of Rights. This constitutional clause. Be aware that you have rights that are across the board given to you, and this is how people challenge the Supreme Court, state laws in the Supreme Court, because the state will infringe upon your rights until the point that a person calls them out on it. And it's sad to say that a state will actually write in these laws, and essentially knowing these policymakers are essentially knowing that they're infringing on people's inalienable rights, but at the same time they continue to do so until it's brought to the SCOTUS, at which point it has to go through all the channels before it can actually reach the point where it gets recognition at the actual Supreme Court level. So it's even then, it's more about knowing your rights than it actually being usable as a tool or a weapon or some kind of deterrent, in the sense of like being a street lawyer. It's not going to benefit you in that sense. If anything, this is more of after the fact application. If you feel like something, like you're being wrongfully convicted on a charge that is essentially just built or founded upon policy that infringes this constitutional right, then that is problematic. That's when you can challenge the law. That's when this has application. So a good example of like inalienable rights right now is like how the tech conglomerates are being caught, harvesting our data. And it is because that they are essentially infringing upon those inalienable rights, our privacy, our right to privacy, our right to one's, information. And so that is a perfect example of like some action that's being done in today's common age that is essentially infringing upon those rights that I am so discussing. So what does this all mean? Like, let's summarize. So essentially all I'm saying is that inalienable rights means that you as a person, even according to the Constitution, have rights and autonomy over your body. That's why to some extent anti-vaxxers are correct. They do have the autonomy to choose so, but then to an extent because they put public health at a high risk. So when you break it all down and you boil down the situation, essentially inalienable rights is just something that people need to be aware of, because the state will mass produce policies, laws, and essentially those laws can be infringing upon your inalienable rights. And also inalienable rights is how we legal test case law, whether or not something's appropriate or needs to be a case turned over. That's how the SCOTUS uses this inalienable law interpretation to understand whether something is violating the Constitution on this personal level. So that's another application for the inalienable rights on a constitutional level, is they really use it as a litmus test to understand whether or not a case law is like in violation, you know, of what's happening. A case law is just a state versus the federal government, the state versus, or, you know, a person versus the state, because they're violating their inalienable rights. So for example, goes back to like the anti-vaxxers in Oregon want their rights to not be able to vaccinate their children because they feel it's their inalienable rights. But then it comes to the argument of public health risk and all that. But back to what I'm saying, at the end of the day, that's why they're able to even contest that, because they have the rights to their inalienable bodies. So thank you. Have a good one. Subscribe. Bye-bye.